Good afternoon. It's so a joy to be here this afternoon. Thank you, Michael, for inviting me to share some reflections about the connection between Eucharist and the ecology, the care for our common home. It is indeed a great joy and honor for me to be able to do so, because it gives me also an opportunity to reflect on some of the work that we are doing in Uganda as part of the Bethany Land Institute. I am co-founder and the president of that organization, Bethany Land Institute in Uganda, where we work with young people in what we call integral ecology. And I will say a little more about this notion of integral ecology in the course of the lecture. But working with young people really to address some of the most pressing issues and challenges that are affecting life, especially the rural communities in Uganda, but I know in many parts of Africa. As Michael mentioned, I am born and raised in Uganda, but for the last 20 or so years I've been living and working here in the US at Duke University and now here at University of Notre Dame. But I have kept that pilgrimage, that going back and forth, and every year I go back maybe 2, 3 times, 4 times in a year. And Bethany Land Institute was born out of the concerns that I could see as I moved back and forth, especially the ecological devastations in the village where I was born, the cutting down of the forests, the food insecurity, the degradation of the land, and rural poverty, the poverty in the rural communities. So that's where this initiative, Bethany Land Institute, was born, but inspired by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, which I'm sure you all have read or just are very familiar with. So to work with young people on the land, to help young people in the rural communities in the process of growing food sustainably, addressing the food insecurity, but also in terms of taking care of the land. At the same time, in a way to work for sustainability, economic sustainability. So the question of integral ecology already comes up here, in that the initiative is both concerned with education, with food, with the ecology, with economics. So many dimensions in a way are coming together. So the young people that we work with in the rural communities, we call them caretakers. And we'll come back to that notion as well, that are in a way educated, formed, we call it formation. So the vision, the mission is to form young leaders in the spirit of integral ecology for rural transformation. Formation is very, very important. There's young people that are formed with the view of returning them to their communities, going back to their communities, and then becoming agents of that rural transformation. At Bethany Land Institute, the caretakers, these young people, are trained in 3 programs. In fact, I say 3+1. The +1 being the outreach into the community, but 3 programs. The first one really being the program of regenerative agriculture, of learning to farm sustainably, with this regenerative concept of farming where nothing goes to waste, but in a way that kind of regenerates the soil in a natural way. But discovering that to do that, you need to bring together not only crops, but animals and fish all together. So when you visit our website, Bethany Land Institute, you will see some of the images of the young people working on the land. The question of land, the question of soil is very important, and it's going to come back in some of the reflections that I'm going to be giving today. So this is one of our first programs in regenerative agriculture working on the land. The second program where young people are getting from is a program of reforestation and ecological education. We have a forest, the land where we are, at Nandere, that is over 120 acres of forest. Sorry, 200, over 200 acres of forest. This forest actually was planted by the missionaries that established this mission, and over the years it has been deforested. So we are preserving that, but also the wetlands, and using this as the base for a major ecological education and reforestation in the community with the target of 1 million trees by the year 2030. So every opportunity, a tree planting opportunity using the Lazarus Forest as the base. The third program is about economics. This is kind of the business school that teaches young people saving, accounting, really managing money, but also how to turn their produce into cash. The marketing side of things is all under the Martha's Market. The Martha's Market also has a circle, that is a savings and credit organization, where young people save the money and they can take out loans as well. And the Martha's Market also has a cooperative where young people can work together with the Bethany Land Institute on the land. So 3 programs plus a major outreach into the rural communities kind of form the base of the programs of Bethany Land Institute. The motto of Bethany Land Institute is love Mother Earth, make everyone happy. So we're trying to be happy with the deep connection with the land. The rhythm of Bethany Land Institute is in a way structured, the timetable, the curriculum is structured around the activities of work, of study, of community, and prayer. So early in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, when the caretakers wake up, they are in the fields. And that goes on until around 10 o'clock when they come out, they have breakfast. And then after breakfast, they go into the classrooms where they learn more from classroom learning about soil mechanics and all the other things. And then there is lunch. In the afternoon, they go back to the learning centers. And then in the evening, there is play, sport, recreation, and then evening prayer and community sessions at the institute, followed by dinner. Community Mass is celebrated once a week on Wednesday, even though during the week everyone is encouraged to attend the parish community Mass that takes place at 6 o'clock every morning. So I begin here my reflection on ecology and Eucharist. I begin with the story of Bethany Land Institute and what we are doing at Bethany Land Institute for 2 reasons. The first reason is because most of what I'm going to share today really reflects on what I myself am learning as I am in this program, what I'm learning about Eucharist and what I am gaining from this rich engagement in the caretaker formation program around the deep connection between the Eucharist and ecology. I want to make the argument that even though at Bethany Land Institute Mass is celebrated once a week, the whole of the work at BLR, at Bethany Land Institute, is suffused by and shaped around the Eucharistic spirituality. It is what, in a way, motivates, shapes, and moves the work at Bethany Land Institute, even though we celebrate Mass only once a week. Second, I begin with this introduction because in terms of thinking about ecology and Eucharist, they cannot be speculative, they cannot be just academic. For the Eucharist shapes and points and directs us towards practical engagement. It is only within some kind of practical engagement, some Eucharistic form of engagement, that the full reality of the Eucharist becomes clear. In other words, what I would like to do for my lecture this afternoon is actually to make two interrelated claims. First of all, that an adequate understanding of the Eucharist intensifies and shapes the Christian response and responsibility for the care of our common home. That's the first claim that I want to make. And secondly, that the efforts, our efforts for the care of our common home are Eucharistic. Those efforts are Eucharistic in more than a symbolic sense. They are truly sacrament. And as we know from Catholic catechism, the sacrament is not only a sign, but also the reality of that, of what it signifies. So that these efforts of creation care are indeed truly a sacrament of God's love for the earth. They are a sacrament of God's presence. For creation is also a theater of God's real presence. And I think this is what Pope Francis is getting to in the reflection that he provides in Laudato Si and in the invitation into integral ecology. So a little bit of background, but I'm sure you know this very well, that in Laudato Si, Pope Francis points to the urgency, the breadth, the seriousness of the ecological crisis that we live in. The notion of integral ecology is the organizing notion around which the reflection in Laudato Si takes place. As the Pope connects a number of things. Integral ecology really pointing to the interconnectedness of things, how everything is connected. The cry of the earth and the cry of the poor go together. The social and the ecological, they belong together. And we don't only need technological solutions, not just policy solutions. What we need a whole new mindset change. We need a new spirituality, a lifestyle. We need an integrated approach, an integral ecology that is able to mobilize different social, cultural, scientific, political, economical, and spiritual energies. So that is able to mobilize different approaches and energies for the care of our common home. This is the invitation into integral ecology, which is an invitation into a praxis, into practical engagement, which is a call also Pope Francis in Laudato Si, a call to conversion, and even a call for what he describes as a bold cultural revolution. So it is actually within that invitation into practical engagement, into praxis, it is within that invitation that Pope Francis provides a reflection on the Eucharist, suggesting that the Eucharist is at the heart of all our efforts towards integral ecology. That the Eucharist is at the heart of our efforts for the care of our common home. It's a rich, beautiful, and deep reflection, and I thought that we could all read it together. So we provided this handout about that reflection that it provides in paragraph 256, as is coming to the end of the reflection on the care for our common home. Beautiful indeed. And I have highlighted a few things because some of the things I don't be able to talk about them. But the whole reflection is actually such a beautiful reflection. It is in the Eucharist that all that has been created finds its greatest exaltation. Grace, which tends to manifest itself tangibly, formed and surpassable expression when God himself became human and gave himself as food for his creatures. The Lord, in the culmination of the mystery of the Incarnation, chose to reach our intimate depth through a fragment of matter. He comes not only from above, but from within. He comes that we may find him in the Word of ours. And this is beautiful. In the Eucharist, fullness is already achieved. The Eucharist is the living center of the universe, the overflowing core of love and of inexhaustible life. Joined to the incarnate Son, present in the Eucharist, the whole cosmos gives thanks to God. Indeed, the Eucharist is itself an act of cosmic love. Indeed, the Eucharist is itself an act of cosmic love. And here, Pope Francis is going to quote from his predecessors, John Paul II, and from Pope Benedict. Yes, cosmic, because even when it is celebrated on the humble altar of the country church, the Eucharist is always in some way celebrated in the altar of the world. He's quoting from Pope John Paul II. The Eucharist joins heaven and earth. It embraces and penetrates all creation. Before the Eucharist joins heaven and earth, it embraces and penetrates all creation. The word which came forth from God's hand returns to him in blessed and undivided adoration in the bread of the Eucharist. Now he's quoting from Benedict. Creation is projected towards divinization, towards the holy wedding feast, towards the unification with the Creator himself. Thus, the Eucharist is also a source of light and a motivation for our concerns for the environment, directing us to be stewards of all creation. What a beautiful reflection today. It is a wonderful piece of meditation, and as Michael said, like today, for example, reflecting on the story of the Emmaus, the recognizing, the breaking of the bread, the number of elements within this reflection that could be really a point of further reflection and meditation. What I'd like to do is to take this reflection and really make the observation that in looking at this reflection that Pope Francis provides towards the end of Laudato Si, after he's laid out the call for all of us to do whatever we can, all our efforts for creation care, and he's offering the Eucharist as the lens, the key at the center of all those efforts. What I see going on here are two directions that Pope Francis is providing. Two directions that reinforce each other. The first direction that I see here is what one might call the Eucharist as a training ground, as a motivation, as a school for notes at the end of the paragraph. Thus, the Eucharist is also a source of light and motivation for our concern for the environment, directing us to be stewards of creation. Is this movement from Eucharist to the world, to the attention for creation, in the same way that the Eucharist, because it is social by nature, moves us towards the concern and the care for the poor. This is something that one might describe as the ecological significance of the Eucharist. That the Eucharist never gives rise and shapes and directs our actions towards the care of creation. It's a long-standing tradition, of course, within Catholic social teaching to draw the social practical implication of the Eucharist, which invoke really the deep connection between worship and ethics. That worship is not something that is kind of locked up within the space of the church, but it immediately moves us into the social, into the outer world. Already in the 4th century, John Chrysostom rightly points out that it is the same Christ that we celebrate and partake in the Eucharist, and it's the same Christ that we encounter in the poor. So there is no way that you can celebrate the Eucharist if you don't attend to the poor. And so, in one of his homilies, he says, do you wish to honor the body of Christ? Then feed the poor, clothe the naked. What good is it if the Eucharistic table is overloaded with golden chalices when he, Christ, is dying of hunger? You have to make that connection. That's an immediate connection that on the celebration of the Eucharist, immediately directed outside. Reflecting a similar concern more recently, Pope St. John Paul II offers a number of rich reflections actually on the Eucharist. And one reflection, when he's reflecting on the eschatological dimension, the end of time, he argues that Christian Eucharistic celebration and vision leads to the expectation of new heavens and a new earth. And thus, the Eucharist, I quote, increases rather than lessens our sense of responsibility for the world today. The Eucharist increases rather than lessens our sense of responsibility for the world today. That is in Ecclesia, the Eucharistia. In fact, for John Paul II, the Eucharist becomes itself a school. He calls it the school of active love for neighbor. The Eucharist educates us, I quote, to become particularly sensitive to all human suffering and misery, to all injustice and wrong, and seek the way to redress them effectively. So the Eucharist as a school. In this reflection that we have seen from Francis continues within the same tradition, connecting worship, life in general, the care of creation in particular. What Francis does in Laudato Si is to more explicitly connect the Eucharist to the cry of the earth. As he notes in relation to the Sabbath, in paragraph 237, and so the day of rest, centered on the Eucharist, sheds its light on the whole week and motivates us to greater concern for nature and for the poor. Nature, creation, and the poor belong together. So that is one direction which is pretty straightforward. The Eucharist as a school, training us, motivates us, educating us, sending us forward to care not just for the poor, but also for the cry of the earth. But Francis is also arguing from the other direction. In fact, from a more basic direction. For the reflections here, you say, thus the Eucharist is also, so there is something more basic than the motivation. I think that's what he's getting to in this paragraph. That the Eucharist itself is, the care for creation itself is a Eucharistic drama. Creation itself is a drama. It's not only the fact that the Eucharist educates and motivates us to greater concern for creation. Our concern for creation educates us and prepares us for the Eucharistic celebration at the table. Indeed, Francis makes an even stronger claim, namely, that when we participate in the care of creation, we already live Eucharistic lives. The work of creation care is itself a participation in a Eucharistic drama. This is the full meaning of the claim that the Eucharist is a spirituality that embraces and penetrates all creation, that the Eucharist is the living center of the universe. So in the rest of this lecture, what I would like to do is provide some few commentary on how the Eucharist, the care for creation, and how creation itself is a Eucharistic drama, and point out at least three elements, three dimensions of this Eucharistic drama that is going on in the rest of creation, which we participate in when we take care of our common home. In the first place, Pope Francis says that the Eucharist is an act of God's cosmic love. Creation as God's cosmic love. And then, quoting from Pope John Paul II, he says, even if it's celebrated in a small church, a small chapel everywhere, it is celebrated at the altar of the Word. God's cosmic love. But God's cosmic love is revealed first and foremost in God's love for creation. The universe is created and loved by God. That's where God's cosmic love begins. We see this not only in the beauty and the splendor of God's creation, as we see in Genesis chapter 1, but also in the way, after each day of creation, God takes pleasure in what is done. It is good. It is pleasing to God. It is beautiful. It pleases God because it is the work of His hands. It is the work of His love. But we see this cosmic love, this love of God, especially in Genesis chapter 2 also, with the care with which God creates and works with the earth, with creation, especially with the soil. For as we know in the story of Genesis chapter 2, whereas the first creation account is kind of more priestly, majestic, God said, and so it was, evening came and morning came. In the second creation account, God is working with God's hand, and God is fashioning things out of the soil. He creates man out of the soil, Adam, from Adama, the soil. Not only that, we are told in the second creation account, God plants a garden, the Garden of Eden, planted by God Himself. So in that second creation account, we encounter God as a farmer, God as a caretaker. You can almost imagine God's hands is soiled with the soil. He's having what I describe as a kind of a love affair with the soil as the caretaker. And then He invites man, the Adam that He has made out of the soil, to participate in that same care for the earth, for the soil, as He gives him the commission. The Lord God took the man that He had made and put him in the garden to work it and care for it. There are so many translations of this verse, verse 15. To cultivate it and keep it, to till it and preserve it. I like this translation of the work because the words that I used in Hebrew are abad and shana. Shana, biblical scholars tell us that these are actually ambiguous words. They could have a double meaning, and many times they do have a double meaning. Abad is one that is usually translated as to cultivate, as to till, as to work. As Ellen Davis, a prominent biblical scholar, tells us that it could also mean not just to work, but also work for. Not only to work the land, but work for the land. And Shema, usually used as keep, as preserve, could also actually mean to observe. So Ellen Davis, together with other biblical scholars, say there is a lot that one can draw from these words, especially if one reads the abide, as not only to till, to cultivate, to toil, but also to work for the well-being of the land, the soil, and also to observe it, to watch it, to, in a way, follow it closely. But also, what is remarkable, that this pair of words, abide and Shema, appear in other places, not many other places in the Old Testament, but they appear in the book of Numbers. Perhaps that's the only time they appear together, but I need to find this out more clear. But I think that's the only time they appear together in that same connection as Abad and Shema. But that time in the book of Numbers is used in connection with the work of the Levites, the priests that serve at the altar in the temple. Here in the book of Numbers, Abad and Shema describe priestly roles. That's what the Levites do. They work for and care and observe the temple, the altar. The implications are, of course, immediate and many. The first implication, that the whole of creation, in a way, is God's temple, where man is called to be a caretaker, to abide and Shema. The whole of creation is God's temple, and the Garden of Eden is the sanctuary, so to say, where the Most High dwells. Secondly, the implication is taking care, or caretaking, is not only man's vocation, it is a priestly duty. It is a liturgical role through which man participates in that God's love for creation, that cosmic love of God. And in the process of doing so, man discovers God's love for man, for himself, for herself. For it is, as Wangari Maathai reminds us, the famous Kenyan Nobel laureate environmentalist reminds us, it is by taking care of the earth, it is in taking care of the earth that we learn what it means to love ourselves. In degrading the earth, we degrade who we are. So there is a lot, in a way, that kind of points to the Eucharistic drama, the liturgical drama that is already underway within creation, into which man is called into this vocation of Abad and Shema. That is long even before we come to celebrate that at the altar of the Eucharist in the liturgical assembly. This is a kind of, in a way, caretaking, Eucharistic, in a way, vision that BLI, Bethany Land Institute, is leaning into. And so that's why we call our trainees, young people, we call them caretakers, in order to draw from this deep Eucharistic liturgical framework of God's cosmic love that is already present, available, obvious in creation. Creation as a drama, a Eucharistic drama, is creation and the Paschal sacrifice. For God's cosmic love is a self-sacrificing love. As you know, the Eucharist, we celebrate the Paschal mystery, the death and resurrection of Christ. The night he suffered, he took bread. We remember that. And so proclaim, Christ has died, Christ is risen. The Eucharist is about the celebration of the Paschal sacrifice, of the death and resurrection of Christ, which connects to God's overarching self-giving love, Christ's dying and resurrection. The process of dying and rising, death and new life, is what is always going on in creation. It is this natural cycle of dying and rising that regenerative agriculture taps into or seeks to connect to. The key with regenerative agriculture, the kind of regenerative agriculture that we are trying to tap into at BLI, the key is not to fight nature, but to imitate. The key is to learn to enter into what Father Godfrey Zamudio calls the dance of nature. Father Godfrey Zamudio is a Catholic priest, Dominican priest from Nigeria. He lives in Benin, where he has established a Songhai center that works with young people in regenerative agriculture, again growing food sustainably, also taking care of the land. He talks about this dance. The key is not to fight nature, but to enter into the dance of nature, what others call biomimicry. As for other regenerative agriculture, nothing is wasted, because the waste in one field becomes a resource in another field. The animals eat the crops, the poop of the animals fertilizes the soil then grows the crops. So there is a kind of cycling, if you like. It is a pastoral process of living and dying. Zamudio describes it even as a form of contemplation. That entering into that cycle in a way is an invitation to contemplate this mystical element of God's creation, and leads one to realize that the universe is not so much a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be participated in. Therefore, Godfrey Zamudio, of course, is a Dominican. You know, Dominicans they are always called the Order of Preachers. The founder of the Dominican Order, Dominic, already told his disciples, his priests, that the Eucharist, so the universe, is a mystery. The primary approach that we have to the mystery is not by solving, but entering into that mystery. And so he encourages his priests to enter through a contemplative dimension, to enter into that mystery and understand it fully. They become part of that mystery, and only when they have fully understood it can they then explain it to the others. So the good sermon, the good homily, it really comes from a deep appreciation of that mystery. And so, Godfrey Zamudio reflects that kind of Dominican spirituality. And so he calls the work of what he's doing in regenerative agriculture a form of contemplation, or even a sermon, because it is entering into that Paschal mystery. What he's getting to, and what I'm discovering through the work of BLI, that by working with nature, by entering the dance of nature, one discovers that birth and death, decay and renewal belong together, and that we ourselves are part of that natural cycle of death and resurrection. This, of course, does not minimize the significance of Christ who died for us. It does not minimize it. On the contrary, it just confirms that Christ, as St. Paul says, is the firstborn of all creation. And he, being the firstborn of all creation, also becomes pattern of our lives. So the more we become connected to the earth, the more we discover that death leads to life, and just like the rest of creation, we discover that we are dying every day. And also, we are being resurrected every day. There is something of a Paschal mystery that is going on within. And this being resurrected is not just a reward for an individual soul, for their good. This being resurrected is a being of kind of a givenness for the life of the world, for the life of others, so that others may have life. And that's what we see going on within creation. So we see in creation the pattern of Christ's self-giving love, of his Paschal mystery, of his living and dying and resurrection, that now becomes a pattern for all creation, for all of us human beings as well. That our life then becomes a gift for others. So it is within that, in a way, participation that we also learn the full meaning of Christ saying that unless a grain of wheat falls on the ground and dies. A Paschal reality that is already underway within creation. The third dimension is creation as a cosmic liturgy, creation as a sacrament. Whereas, as we noted earlier, the liturgy is a school that teaches us how to see and attend to the needs of the world and the poor and the creation. Creation in turn teaches us to see and name God. As the book of Job says, and ask the animals, they will teach you. The birds in the sky, they will tell you. Or speak to the earth, and it will teach you. Or let the fish in the sea inform you. Which of all these does not know the hand of the Lord has done? In his hands is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. Job chapter 12. So ask the earth, ask the creatures, ask creation. The Eastern tradition is more attentive to this sense of creation as a school, as a sacrament. And Pope Francis draws attention to that when in paragraph 9 he says, the sacraments, I quote, the sacraments are a living way in which nature is taken up by God to become the means of mediating supernatural life. This is especially clear in the spirituality of the Christian East. That is Pope Francis. When you briefly look at the tradition of the Christian East, you can see confirmed very clearly that there is a liturgical, theological vision of the world that is underway. Already as early as the 3rd century, Anton of Egypt, who is the father of modern monasticism, described nature as a book that teaches us about God's creation. Creation, notes, is a sacred book whose letters and syllables are the universal aspects of creation, in the same way as Scripture does the beautiful world. Maximus the Confessor speaks about creation as cosmic liturgy, and more recently, Patriarch Bartholomew, by depicting creation as a sacrament, refers to the entire present cosmos, beautiful expression, as the burning bush of God's uncreated energies, and humankind as a priest before the altar of creation, a microcosm and a mediator. So there is, in a way, a liturgical dance, if you like, already going on within creation. It is within this context that Pope Francis then says, as Christians, we are also called to accept the word as a sacrament of communion, as a way of sharing with God and our neighbor on a global scale. It is our humble conviction that the divine and the human meet in the slightest detail of the seamless garment of God's creation, in the last state of the dust of our planet. It is in this sense that Francis talks about the Eucharist as joining heaven and earth, and as spirituality that embraces and penetrates all creation. So let me conclude by making just 3 brief remarks. The first remark is about a double movement, a double journey. Because we've been highlighting, in a way, the Eucharist is always what is going on within creation, as the theater of God's cosmic love, and human beings being invited as priest, microcosm, mediator, as caretaker. So we've been describing this, that this is always going on. But also means that the Eucharist, in a way, becomes the Eucharist that we celebrate at the altar and the table, becomes the climax, the full exaltation, as Pope Francis says, of all that is being going on. So there is something like a double movement going on here. First of all, from the creation to the Eucharistic table, and from the Eucharistic table back to creation. The Eucharist at the table, at Mass, derives from and then returns us to life, to creation, to the care of God's creation. The second observation I want to make by way of conclusion is about the Eucharist as spirituality. Human life, Pope Francis notes in Laudato Si, is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships with God, with neighbor, and with the whole earth. Our relationship with the material world has been broken, Francis notes, and thus needs healing. This calls for an ongoing conversion, which is to say, a new way of seeing, of thinking, and living in the world. The radical transformation required involves mind, heart, politics, economics, lifestyle, everything. That's integral. And because the Eucharist is a spirituality that embraces and penetrates everything, Pope Francis here proposes it as the framework for reimagining and re-engaging not only our religious and church practices, but for reimagining and re-engaging the social, political, and economic realities of our time in the wake of climate change and the global ecological crisis. That is why a renewed appreciation and practice of the Eucharist, this double movement, becomes the foundation of a new reimagined society, a new reimagined life together, pushing us to work for a new vision of politics and economics shaped by Eucharistic patterns of living, of gratitude, of love, care for creation, and service for the common good. So we can speak about Eucharistic politics and Eucharistic economics. Finally, let me end where we started, with Bethany Land Institute. June, at Bethany Land Institute, we are beginning formally a program that we are calling the Pastoral Formation of Integral Ecology for Seminarians and Priests. One month, the priests and religious and seminarians come to Bethany Land Institute and work with the caretakers in the three programs. When we started the institute, and that's the picture with the seminarian, the bishop asked the seminarians to come to the institute for 4 months. This was shortly after COVID, and so the seminaries had not started. And so the bishop said, well, you can spend time on the land. The seminarians didn't like it. They came kicking and screaming because they said, what's the bishop doing? We are doing masters in philosophy, in theology, we are going to be priests, so only God and so forth, and now they take us to the land. But they came because the bishop asked them, and it was a condition for their ordination. At the end of 4 months, they didn't want to leave. Something had happened. My sense is that they are not only falling in love with the rhythm, with the work, but also getting their hands into the soil. Something had happened in the process of working with and on the land. My hope is that what had happened was a deep appreciation of the Eucharist as the reality that embraces and penetrates all creation. I know this has been true for me. I've been a priest almost now 40 years, but it's only recently, since I started working with the Bethany Land Institute, that I've come to really a deeper appreciation of the Eucharist as a spirituality that penetrates everything. It's only recently that I'm discovering this rich and dynamic dimension of the Eucharist, Eucharistic spirituality and practice, by working with and on the land. And as I do, I find myself falling more in love with the celebration of the Mass, especially during offertory, when we take the bread and the wine and offer God thanks. Blessed are you, O Lord, God of all creation. Through your goodness, through your bounty, we have this bread and this wine, fruit of the earth, work of human hands. Offering you that. Aware that the whole of creation is present within that act of offering. But also fully aware that I'm lifting up not only creation, but also the many caretaking efforts, the work of human hands, the work of preserving creation's hymn of thanksgiving. Fully aware also that the more I do so, the more I almost feel an impatience to get back into the work of caretaking, into the earth, and the many tasks of caretaking. All I want to say is that BLI for me has been a place of falling in love, with the Eucharist in its very, very many rich dimensions. I guess in the end, it's about finding a place, or it's about letting a place find you, a place where you can put down roots, where you can get into the soil, into matter, where you can get into the core of caretaking. And the deeper that one gets into that vocation, that call, that work of caretaking in a particular place, the more the real presence of the Eucharist becomes real. And so, friends, go find a place. Thank you.